subnet masks a little bit to kind of get smaller networks created from our major networks. Now, let me just say one thing here, a little caveat. One thing that really pleases me about the Network Plus exam is that you don't have to exert all the mental energy to learn and memorize how to logically subnet a network in your head. I think it's really an overrated skill. As a Cisco CCNP, I can subnet with the best of them in my head. But the bottom line is there's plenty of subnet tables out there and subnet calculators that basically you can just kind of pull them up and say, you know what, I have this many networks and I need this many hosts. Type in some numbers, boom, and it gives you the addresses that you can assign. And you can either assign these numbers manually to all of your workstations, or you can use, as we'll look at later or talk about, you can use DHCP to create individual scopes, and then you can just place those address ranges and have DHCP dynamically assign these addresses and subnet masks. You know, bottom line is, give me somebody who can troubleshoot and secure a network any day over somebody who's a Boolean algebra expert. So we're going to talk about why you would subnet and the advantages to creating subnets, but we're not going to get into the mathematics of it because literally I could spend a couple of hours on it. And you don't need to know that for the Network Plus exam. That's great news. Now, realistically, whether your address class is Class A, Class B, or Class C, you may want your entire network to be broken up into subdomains, into subnetworks that are smaller than 16 million or 65,000 or even 254 hosts. You've got different business units, you've got different departments, you've got different projects, you've got different geographical areas. The list goes on of why you want to subdivide your network into smaller units, smaller chunks, for administrative purposes, for geographic purposes, for political purposes, for security purposes. Well, let's look at this Class C here real quick. If my small business has a Class C address or a Class C network of 192.168.101.0, I know that by default, with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, the first 24 bits are the network, the last 8 bits are the host. That gives me 254 hosts, because I can't use 0 for the network, and 255 is the broadcast. But I might want to break up this 254 address space into 4 departments, again, for a wide variety of reasons, 4 subnetworks. In this case, all I simply do is I just manipulate the subnet mask. For example, right now, by default, with 254, all 8 of those bits in the subnet mask, if you look down at the bottom here, they're turned off in the last octet of the subnet mask, meaning all 8 bits are for the host. Well, if I want to get and create some subnets, all I do is create a separate partition and say, you know what, I'm going to use the first 2 bits for subnetworks, or I could say, you know what, if I need more networks, I just grab the first 3 bits of the last octet and create some subnetworks out of that. Now, the more bits you use to create subnetworks, again, the fewer hosts you have per subnetwork. So if I want to create 4 subnets where I had one large network originally, I could use a mask of 255.255.255.192, which is the first 2 bits, which is 128 plus 64. Say you turn those on, it gives you 192 instead of 0. I can use that subnet mask for all the hosts in my company, and that gives me 4 subnetworks. Now, of course, the more subnetworks you create, remember, for each subnetwork, I've got a network number and I've got a broadcast on that network. So it effectually starts kind of diminishing the amount of available addresses I have. The more subnetworks I create, the more network numbers, the more broadcast numbers, and again, I get fewer overall addresses. So this 254 gets depleted more and more by the more bits that I use to create subnetworks. Now again, as I said, there's plenty of subnetwork tables and subnet calculators that you simply go, okay, I've got a Class B number or a Class B address, I've got a Class C, I've got a Class A, here's my IP address, how many networks do I want, how many hosts do I want, and it gives you the address ranges to assign. But IP subnetting is basically used for those reasons. Now, from a network design standpoint, the main thing I've done here by using this router and using IP subnetting is I've created now from one large broadcast domain or one large network, I've now created 4 smaller broadcast domains. Now, what do I mean by broadcast domain? Well, think about it. As before, I had this one Class C network, and 101.255 was the broadcast address. So all 254 hosts, let's say I used up all my addresses, if I send out a broadcast packet, over 200 hosts are getting that package. Well, by creating broadcast domains, I'm basically saying that the finance department here, only people in the finance department are getting broadcasts from other people in the finance department. Only people in the sales department are getting broadcast packets from other salespeople. This is a very important concept, not only for keeping down my bandwidth usage and creating a more efficient network, but I might not want my sales group, or let's say my accounting and finance group, sending broadcast packets into my sales group or maybe into my customer service group. I want to create broadcast domains, and I can use other services, other software on my router to add security and other mechanisms to control traffic as it moves from broadcast domain to broadcast domain, or subnet 1 to subnet 2. And again, I use routers and IP subnetting as a basic way to do this. Now, something else that was added to the mix a few years ago to kind of help with this process of running out of IP addresses was they said, you know what? Let's just do away with this Class A, Class B, Class C thing altogether, and let's just use what's called classless interdomain routing, CIDR or CIDR, or I've heard it pronounced CEDAR as well. What CIDR basically does is this. You take your IP address. Let's go back over to that other screen. What classless interdomain routing basically does is says, you know what? Now we have the entire 32-bit IP address space. There's no more Class A, there's no more Class B, there's no more Class C. You just take your IP address, and then at the end of it, you just put a /, and you say, you know what? How many bits are for the network? Well, for a default Class C, it would be 24. Okay, but in the example I gave you earlier, we saw the 4 subdomains created. We could take the same IP address and just say 192.168.101.45, and since we're going to basically use 2 of these bits here, we'll just say, okay, 24, 25, 26. The first 26 bits represents the network. That gives us what? 6 bits left over for hosts. Well, obviously, if we only have 6 bits left over for hosts, then we're going to have fewer hosts per network. As a matter of fact, it's 2 to the 6th power minus 2, right? Remember that from earlier? Now, why is it 2? Because for each network that we have to take away 2, because we can't use the network address and we can't use the broadcast address on that network. So what CIDR basically does is it gets rid of the classes, and you basically just add or append to the end of your IP address how many bits you're using for the network, and you can do this on any IP address. You could say, you know what, I want to have 172.16.10.50, and I want to use 18 bits for the network. Okay, if I'm using 18 bits from the network, 32 minus 18 leaves what? 14. That gives me 14 bits for the host. So I've got 2 to the 14th power minus 2 hosts. Now again, all of your subnet calculators are going to operate with CIDR or CIDR. So you can go ahead and you can map out your network using CIDR, classless routing, interdomain routing, classless IP addressing, and you can just use your calculator. You can assign your addresses accordingly. Now I'm talking about assigning addresses here. Let's move beyond the math. Let's move beyond the IP addressing, and let's talk about, there's really 3 ways in our modern networks. Let's say we're in a Microsoft environment. There's really 3 ways that we're going to dole out these IP addresses and subnet masks to our workstations, our servers, our PCs, our laptops. There's really 3 main ways. We're going to finish up this nugget on IP addressing briefly talking about those 3 methods. You need to be aware of the fact that there's really three main methods for assigning